Hello and welcome to this bonus episode of The Evolution of Horror. This week sees the release of a brand new horror film, the remake of Speak No Evil. Now this was, I'm sure many of you know because I've been waxing lyrical about this film for 2 years now, this was my absolute favourite horror film of 2022. This was the movie directed by Christian Taftrup and it is one of the most excruciatingly uncomfortable, bleak and terrifying horror movies I've ever seen. It's one of those films that kind of affected me so much that I had to kind of step outside into the fresh air and go for a little walk and just get out of the house after watching it. The first time a film has really made me feel that way since, I think, Martyrs in 2008. It was such a bold, interesting and uncomfortable film. And so when I heard the news that immediately a year later, Blumhouse were going to remake this film starring James McAvoy, I was cynical. I was not in any way positive about the idea of a Speak No Evil remake because I knew that a remake would probably smooth the edges. It would probably take away some of the most shocking and disturbing moments about the original. And I was really not that up for it. Well, I'm always happy to admit when I am wrong or when I am pleasantly surprised. And as it happens, Speak No Evil, the remake, is really, really fun. Now, it is still not a patch on the original, but that's okay because it's actually doing its own thing. It's not trying to be a carbon copy of the original film, not in the same way that The Strangers Chapter 1 was, for example, earlier this year, which felt like a complete pointless rehash of what we'd already seen. This version, directed by James Watkins, starring James McAvoy, Mackenzie Davis, Scoot McNairy, and a few other great people, is not a carbon copy. It takes that story, does something different with it. It explores different kinds of themes, and it works, in my opinion, as a really nice kind of companion to the original film. You know, they can both exist without each other, and they also can coexist together as well, and I really like that. That is exactly the sort of thing that I look for in a remake. It also has one of the best and most unhinged James McAvoy performances as well. So I was a big fan, and I got the chance to sit down and chat to the director, James Watkins. So James Watkins, a bit of a seasoned British horror director by this point, because he directed the slightly divisive Eden Lake in 2008, that kind of like nasty kind of hoodie horror from back in the day. He then directed the film adaptation of The Woman in Black, starring Daniel Radcliffe as well, and now he's doing this. So he's taking on different types of kind of classic British horror, which has been really interesting to see. So I sat down and had a little chat with James about making this movie, about tackling a remake of such a brilliant film so soon, and his kind of relationship with horror and British horror. And I also asked him a little bit about his thoughts on Eden Lake now that a bit of time has passed, a movie that was quite heavily criticised for being quite classist, a movie that the Daily Mail gave 5 stars, which is always red flag, right? So I sat down and had a little 15-minute chat with him about these various topics. It's pretty much spoiler-free. Nothing about this interview will spoil Speak No Evil for you, which is out in cinemas this weekend. And if you want to hear a full review, that will be coming on Patreon very soon. We will be covering it on Fresh Blood. So me and my co-hosts, Steph McKenna, Brad Hanson, and Becky Dark, will all be discussing our thoughts in a bit more depth on James Watkins' Speak No Evil. So if you want to hear our review, sign up to our Patreon, patreon.com/evolution of horror. So please enjoy my interview with director James Watkins.
I admire you. Louise is a great woman. I've always wanted a family like yours.
Mom, something's not right with him.
No! What is wrong with you? I want to back up the car, and I want to leave now.
Oh no, that is really bad luck. I know we can both be
A bit much. They're going to kill us. What? He went dead.
Mom?
James Watkins, hello, how are you?
I'm well, thanks. Yeah, excited to, getting the film out into the world.
So exciting. Tell us a little bit about this film if there is anyone listening who doesn't know about Speak No Evil, without giving away too much.
Well, it's a kind of psychological thriller with a kind of darkly horrific core, I suppose. But it's a ride. It's a roller coaster ride. It's about two families that meet on holiday in Italy and become kind of holiday friends. One couple, the host couple, are an English couple that live in the West Country of England on a farm, and they invite this American expat couple, and they both got young kids, and they invite them over to come over for a weekend in their farmhouse to drive out from London, and they come out, and then the sort of great long weekend turns out to be not so great.
Exactly. It doesn't go well. Obviously, this is a remake from a film from 2022. That feels fairly recent, right? What were your concerns when tackling a film like this? Because I think, a lot of people, when they first heard the news about this, I think for a lot of us, when we hear the news of any kind of remake, we are always a little bit cynical about it, right?
Well, I think it's fair enough. I'm as cynical as the next person when I look at remakes, and I've been sent things to remake in the past, and I'm like, oh God, no way. And, what was interesting about this was, I saw Christian's film, I loved it, but I also thought, okay, there's a way to sort of play this in a different key, slightly different register, to do something slightly different with it, to relocate it, to make it set in England. That was a big part of my first conversation with Blumhouse. I was like, can I set this in England? Because, most of their films are American. And I thought, I sort of said, look, guys, if you want to do this as a New York couple that go to West Virginia, I probably wouldn't want to do it. But if it can be set in the UK and I can bring that English, characters that I know about, a humor that I know about, a vibe that I can know about, and make it kind of specific. And in that specificity, find something a bit more universal. I can do that. But there were so many themes in Christian's film that I thought, okay, there's an opportunity for me to dig more into those and, into the social horror, the horror of everyday life and our social interactions, And I thought in digging into that, I could also play, as well as the horror, the humor a lot more. And so I think I definitely went in that direction as well. I wanted to make it, there's a lot of laughs in this movie, deliberately, So, because I think that kind of cringe of, how we all interact with each other, So yeah, I just thought, and then the end, that I saw there are ways that I wanted to go in different. There's no point remaking somebody's film and remaking the same movie in my mind. Christian's movie exists and it's brilliant, and you can go and see it. And this will drive traffic to Christian's film, and they can have a conversation with each other, and I think that's a good thing, But if you want to, people should go and see Christian's film, and then they see my film, and
Yeah. I mean, I really agree with that. I was so pleasantly surprised to feel like these two films they were companion pieces to each other, I think, which is really nice. Tell us a little bit about making it British, because there is almost this kind of folk horror vibe to it. Tell us about bringing that unique kind of Britishness to this particular version of the story.
Yeah, well, you know what? The Americans are brilliant at mythologizing their own landscapes. They're kind of, whether it's New York, Woody Allen's New York, or Monument Valley, John Ford Westerns, or LA, Michael Mann, or whoever, Paul Thomas Anderson. And we're really crap at it in this country. We don't make hardly any movies set in our country, and certainly not kind of thrillers, right? And I've done that a couple of times, and I'm passionate about it. It's like we've got a brilliant resource, we've got a brilliant landscape, we've got a brilliant history, we've got brilliant mythology. And so I sort of kind of thought, well, immediately, you start in London, it's one of the great cities of the world, or, we've got Europe, we've got Tuscany, and then London, and then the West Country, and you've got beautiful countryside. And yeah, very deliberately, they go past this kind of figure carved in the chalk hillside, and it is the sort of pagan, slightly pagan, because that's what Paddy represents. He represents this kind of, he's a man of the earth. He's old school. He represents these, and he talks about these kind of rural values that he has, this kind of unreconstructed, simpler life that he's trying to sell. So it definitely tapped into that, I suppose.
Absolutely. And tell me a little bit about this character of Paddy. I think that's another thing that kind of really stands out from the original version of this film. James McAvoy has obviously talked about how he was thinking of people like Andrew Tate in his head, right, when he was becoming this character, this kind of like toxic male, I suppose. Tell us a little bit about kind of working with James and creating that character together.
Well, it was interesting because we talked a lot, James and I, about people like that and people in politics, these kind of demagogues in politics that, who we've had here and in America, who kind of come in and say, I'm the maverick. I'm the person that if you follow me, I'm different. I'm a rule breaker. And often it's a false promise. So, but these people have charm, however much, whether you like them or hate them, these people like Paddy, they work because they have a twinkle or a charm or something, right? That connects with people. And it's with Paddy, I think so. He has this sense of fun, and that's this kind of maverick sense of fun, this rule breaking sense of fun. Immediately people are drawn to that, so we kind of constantly, with James, it was a constant calibration of red light, green light kind of thing. So it's like, because he can't just be boorish. He can't just be, if he shows up and he's just this kind of alpha kind of dick, then nobody's going to be interested. Everyone's just going to go, oh God, he's that guy. He's that guy in the pub. And he's not that. He's got a kind of a twinkle in the eye and he's got in the smile. But it's the codification of it, and particularly for Americans, these American couple, it's hard for them to read. It's like, is he twinkly and fun and charming? Or is he, and is it this kind of wacky English humor? Or is he just a bit unpleasant, And it's really hard, and for them to judge that, I suppose. But, without his charm, he wouldn't have his, like a lot of sociopathic narcissists, they're incredibly charming. While they're getting their own way.
Yeah, and, how important was that kind of Britishness to you in the kind of the awkwardness of the horror, I suppose? Because I always thought, even though obviously the original, it's about this kind of Danish couple, I always thought there was something that felt quite British about, watching this kind of the horror of the politeness of this couple, right? The kind of social awkwardness. There is something quite British about that. I know I personally found it incredibly disturbing watching the original film for the first time because I kept thinking, oh my God, this would happen to me. I would be this person. I would be too polite. Just get the fuck out of there, But when you've got Americans, there is a culture difference, right? There is a difference in attitudes and the way they might react to things. In this version, you've got a British couple and you've got an American couple. I just wondered if you thought about that kind of, I guess, that cultural specificity of these characters.
Yes, in a couple of ways. Look, I think Christian's film is kind of a satire on Danish compliance,
Yeah.
And in terms of, look, there's a cliche that, Brits are oppressed and Americans are outspoken and whatever. And that's not necessarily true. And so, Paddy is a particular type of Brit that I know, who's kind of, very Falstaffian and, hail fellow, well met and, larger than life. And, we've all met, we all know that guy. And these kind of East Coast Americans who are a bit kind of, Ivy League and, more oppressed. So there was that, I suppose, and and how they read them. But I think the key thing is probably in the third act, where I just don't believe, and I spoke about this a lot at length when we were kind of workshopping the script with the actors, from Scoot, who's from Texas. These American characters, there's a point at which, once the cat's out the bag, and I don't want to give any spoilers away, I suppose, but what their degree of agency is. At what point do you try to do something? I think the compliance satire works for me until the cat's out the bag. Then I think you're in a world of different rules. And I think particularly for Americans. And I've seen that with American audiences. They just would not stomach it. But I very deliberately didn't want them suddenly to become superheroes. They're pretty rubbish. Deliberately in the way, because what I wanted to lean into was, okay, now something else, but now we're no longer in the polite world. And in fact, I extended the politeness in my movie, as in politeness can be a positive value. They try and polite their way out of there for quite a while, in this kind of awkward charade that everybody's engaged in. And then it breaks down. And then it's like, okay, now we're in the rules of the Wild West. How do we cope? And the truth is, they're terrified. And they're fumbly, and they try and do these kind of the genre tropes, the Molotov cocktail and whatever, but they screw them up, and she's got a pair of marigold gloves on, and Ben has a freak out, and it's just like, that's just more real for me, I suppose.
Absolutely. It's kind of scrappy, isn't it? And in that regard, I don't want to spoil too much, but I think, towards its final act, I got kind of Straw Dogs vibes from this movie, quite strong Straw Dogs vibes. Just tell me a little bit about kind of what films you took inspiration from when kind of creating this particular adaptation.
I mean, Straw Dogs very much was in my mind at the end because, there's a brilliant moment with Dustin Hoffman when he kind of killed someone. He's like, I killed him. And it's, and it's his shock that he's done this as much as anything else. And I kind of, that moment was a moment with Louise with the blood-covered marigold gloves, which was very much inspired in my mind by that. But up front, I was looking at, again, it's films of Ruben Östlund and Michael Haneke and TV shows like White Lotus, where it's that sort of that exploration of the horrors of social interaction in everyday life, I think that was really in my mind. The horror, there's enough horror in how we get through the day with each other. And, and I thought I can lean into that, and I can lean into that dramatically and comedically, in a fun way, I suppose.
How did you tackle this movie in terms of it being a horror film as well? Because I think what's so interesting, when you look at the films you've directed, it shows the kind of broad scope and variation of horror, doesn't it? Because you've got Eden Lake, which was this quite nasty, violent film that was, felt very much of that kind of mid-2000s era of horror. Then you made the Woman in Black adaptation, right, with Daniel Radcliffe, which kind of felt much more, that's classic British ghost story. It's gothic. And then this is kind of somewhere weirdly in between. There is this kind of folk horror element, but also it's the horror of manners. It's the horror of human behavior, isn't it? And I just wondered, as a director, how do you pull off that, the kind of scares, for want of a better word, in this film?
It was interesting. There are no kind of jump scares in this movie. I didn't want it to be, I wanted it to be, I saw it as a sort of psychological thriller and a slow burn. And part of it was how slow can we make the burn? How can we just slowly raise the temperature? And part of, keep the audience on side and play the unease. And so it was kind of instinct, I suppose, more than anything else, as in how we draw this out. Are these scenes fun to watch? Are they, and are they constantly escalating? And they are very subtly escalating every time. And that's important. Otherwise, we cut a few scenes. There are a few scenes I absolutely love that no one will ever see because they weren't escalating. They were just reiterating the same beats, if you know what I mean. And it was, and you have to be ruthless in the edit because it's like you go, okay, and you can hear people really enjoying a scene, but there's a kind of what John Harris, my editor, and I call referred pain, is that they enjoy the scene, but at some point you can see them a couple of minutes later and they're getting a bit fidgety. And you realize, okay, because instinctively there's something weird about the human brain and story. And they know people just want a story to keep advancing and keep escalating. And it's really hard to quantify. But yeah, people just know it. And yeah, so that was an interesting exploration, I guess.
I would love to just finish by asking you a bit about Eden Lake. It's a movie that still gets talked about today. People have their opinions of it one way or the other. And it does, like I said, it kind of very much feels like a product of its time, that kind of horror of the 2000s. When you look back on it today, what are your kind of memories of it? What are your thoughts on it now? And do you think this is still a movie that would get made now in 2024?
I mean, probably as well as it did. It didn't make much money, right? Not it had a kind of, low level kind of part of the conversation, but I think it kind of felt, it scratched at a few itches and some people liked it, some people didn't, but I think you can make that film. We made it for very little money. And listen, if I made it with Kelly Riley, Michael Fassbender and Jack O'Connell, yes, I could get it made now. So, but we couldn't make it for about £2.5 million or whatever it was. So,
yeah, I think I more mean thematically, how well the film holds up. Is this still when it talks about the kind of the class issues that it explores and that kind of thing, do you still feel like these themes would kind of work in horror now?
There are people that, I think Owen Jones gave the film a bashing, saying it was classist and all that. I don't agree with that. I don't think it's about that. I think it's about cycles of violence and how cycles of violence are passed from one generation to another. And I think, Steve in that movie is just as complicit, Fassbender's character, in his kind of alphadom and scratching at the kids as they are. So, so it's, listen, I don't know. I think people can get a film is a film. You don't have to, you can disagree with it. You can hate it. You can have a conversation with it. But I think when you get into a world of kind of, shutting down things because they may, I don't know, irritate some people or whatever. I don't know. It's kind of the point of making things and doing things, to have conversations, and in some ways to irritate some people. That's, so what, right?
Oh God, I agree. Like, horror's supposed to push our buttons, isn't it? And actually, horror is being embraced more by critics these days. I think since movies like Get Out and, Hereditary, I feel like critics have started accepting horror films more. I wonder what they would have made of Eden Lake if it was released now. I wonder if that reaction would have been different.
There's a certain type of horror movie that critics like. Now, I mean, Get Out is a brilliant movie and it should be celebrated. And it's thematically rich. It's really well made. It's super entertaining. But the thing about horror movies is they can be made for, often are made for a price, and the ones that I'm interested in are the ones that kind of scratch at something that's, in the world, in our fears, in our anxieties that we have now, rather than just clockwork. A film that it's easy to create jump scares and to do that and, whatever. But actually the ones that get under the skin and, and have that sort of resonance in some way. But I think they should also be entertaining. It's, people have tough lives and, you buy a ticket to the cinema, I think you want to be entertained. Entertainment can mean a lot of things, of course, right? It doesn't, it can be there can be a kind of nourishment to it. But you want to give people a ride. You want to give people an experience in the cinema. And I think if people go and see my film in the cinema, the kind of amplification that the audience gives you is the communal experience. You don't get that at home. And I think that makes it is a reason to be in the cinema.
Completely agree. James Watkins, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. And there we go. A big thank you to the brilliant James Watkins. A really nice guy, actually, and it was really fun to get to chat to him about Speak No Evil and a little bit about Eden Lake there as well. I'm keen to know what everybody makes of this remake because, like I said, I was pleasantly surprised. I imagine some people are gonna not love it. Some people seem to really love it, but please do let me know your thoughts. And don't forget, if you want to hear an extended review of the film, you can sign up to our Patreon, where we have our monthly Fresh Blood strand, where me and my co-host will discuss and review every new horror release out that month. Just head to patreon.com/evolution of horror. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back very soon to resume normal business here on the main feed and continue our Nature Bites Back series of the evolution of horror.